Canada and Canadians have had to deal with a dizzying level of immigration policies that have happened over the past few years that have left most Canadians generally confused about what exactly is happening. After COVID, there was just widespread understanding that there were these labor gaps, specifically in the service and retail sectors. And that's exactly what the Retail Council of Canada had lobbied the federal government on. That there were these massive labor gaps, that Canadians weren't wanting to work in frontline service industries. And so there was this need to open up our immigration pathways specifically for low-skilled labor. And the federal government did exactly that. In 2022, 2023, 2024, Canada saw millions of temporary foreign workers entering into our country to fill those labor gaps, or at least that's what the Retail Council of Canada would say that they did. The council even went as far as lobbying the government to extend the amount of time that international students in particular could work while attending full-time studies in their schools. So there was this massive lobbying effort to not only attract international workers, but also a lobbying effort to attract international students and allow them to work more hours. But you see, as the policies were enacted by the federal government, they didn't really think about the downstream impacts this would have on our society. Now, I don't need to tell you some of those downstream impacts, but let's just high level it for a second. One is housing. The amount of people coming in, no one thought about housing at the federal level. The idea that international students could be admitted to colleges and universities and those same institutions didn't have to build student housing alongside every individual they accepted, that only means that they would enter the private rental housing market. And especially what we're seeing amongst temporary foreign workers, there's a higher susceptibility that they'll be housed in substandard living conditions, tethered to an employer. Housing being one. Another, social cohesion. As far as I know, the level of settlement services funding has actually gone down, or at least stabilized or gone down. So the level of social cohesion also takes a hit. All of you know this. You all know this. You see it, you live it, you breathe it every day in our society. We see more and more immigrants, specifically from South Asian countries, who are less familiar or knowledgeable or aware of the social norms here in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and in Canada. It's no one person's fault, but there is an unwillingness by our government, at least, to address that very issue. There's also a level of personal responsibility that can't be lost here, but at the end of the day, social cohesion is a concern that I think the federal government did not think about over the past few years as they were ramping up low-skilled immigration. There's other issues with this, like clustering, which I've discussed in more detail. Something the federal government, I don't know, is aware and is turning a blind eye, but there are specific services needed in specific communities across our country where we see a clustering of immigrants from specific regions living. Try saying that 10 times fast. And of course, the final, and these are just 3 that I've done from the research that you know because you watch my channel. And by the way, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button already, because I'm giving you the data, the information that our mainstream media just isn't. But then there's youth unemployment. Now, nationally, it's around 14 to 15%, but that's what's reported. I know and you know in your communities that this is much higher. Many of you have told me that your kids can't find employment, and yet the local Tim Hortons and fast food retailers and Walmarts and others are chock full of temporary foreign workers. Why is that? So those are just 3 high-level downstream policy impacts from the original immigration policies that were enacted after the pandemic. And I think this all led, in my selfish opinion, to a lot more social media pundits talking specifically about this. Tim Hortons getting that moniker of Sing Hortons, leading the federal government to change course, at least in the recent past, or as I'll show you, it's what they probably want you to believe. Now, I'm not denying and disputing that the numbers for temporary foreign workers are coming down. In fact, the number for low-wage temporary foreign workers is being slashed by up to 70% by the current federal government. So to me, it's clear that they're listening to people online, especially, because it seems like our mainstream media, the articles, the news, they're not covering this in nearly as much depth as I'd like. Because the reason why this is most important is because it's not a right or left thing, at least from what I've been seeing and hearing online. It's not, if you're left or right. It's actually every Canadian or most Canadians echoing concern. Now, of course, within this, there are strands of xenophobia and racism and othering that I've definitely experienced as a Canadian citizen who has routinely been told online to go back to my country. But there are people in the middle who say, hey, I'm all for immigration, but not this level of immigration. Which leads me to the most important point, which I'm surprised I'm not hearing from the left or from, the NDP or union activists. Perhaps there are who are signaling this, and I'm ignorant to this, so forgive me for my ignorance. But at a national level, I'm not hearing a pronounced call about the exploitative nature of the temporary foreign worker programs and other programs where we attract foreign talent into Canada. There are well-documented incidents by our mainstream media, thankfully, and others, about temporary foreign workers coming to Canada and being exploited. Tied to an employer, living in shoddy conditions, not really having any rights to speak out or complain to, and so are literally taking it on the chin until they get permanent residency, if and when that happens. And lately, it's been a bigger if. Outside of all of this is something that I've wanted to raise for some time now. And that's when we think of immigration, we think of the federal government. We think of the government of Canada. Rarely do we think about the provinces. But the provinces are also a prominent actor in this space. The government of Ontario recently did something interesting that I want to share with you today. Ontario revokes OINP permanent resident streams ahead of program redesign. Now, this just came out as of May 30th. So as of May 30th, the province revoked all 9 existing permanent resident streams under the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program as part of a broader redesign of the provincial nomination framework. Those streams are entrepreneur, French-speaking skilled worker, master's grad, PhD, employer job offer for in-demand skills, employer job offer for a foreign worker, employer job offer for international student, human capital priorities, and skilled trades. Now, it's interesting here because you think, okay, well, they're clearly making these changes, perhaps to streamline the bureaucracy behind it, and it's not totally clear what will replace this. But KPMG actually just put out a report, I think, just a few days ago, and I want to share this with you as well. If I can scroll up. So Ontario terminates those streams pending introduction of new consolidated pathways. Now, I wanted to scroll down. Anticipated new stream structure. Now, I'm going to pause here. This is just commentary, but it's interesting to see what KPMG is thinking. Ontario has not published eligibility rules or intake timelines. However, based on stakeholder consultations in December, the redesign program is expected to include these 4 tenets. Unified employer job offer stream, merging the 3 prior employer streams into a single pathway with 2 tracks high skill, low skill. Priority healthcare stream, targeting nurses, physicians, and allied health professionals to again address labor shortages. Exceptional talent stream, a new pathway for applicants with advanced credentials or specialized skills. And entrepreneur stream, a redesigned business immigration pathway. Why do I bring all of this up? I mean, this seems like just a bureaucratic, okay, you did things in a pretty strange way before, we're just going to streamline it and make it more efficient. It's, as you noticed in the previous program design, there were 9 streams, some of which attached to like masters and PhD. Now it's much more tied to employer, meaning if you have a job offer, if you have a skill that's in high demand, no more basket weaving. But if you have a job offer, now there are streamlined pathways for you to come to Ontario in particular. Why do I bring that up? Because we know employers have been lobbying the government for immigration pathways. And so the nefarious part of me thinks that employers want employer-driven pathways so that they can attract foreign talent, tether their employment to them and their time in Ontario to them, and on the more extreme ends, maybe engage in illegal work practices of exploitative labor, but also on the less extreme aspects of this, allow that person to come to Ontario, but only work for the employer, right? Only work for that one employer. I think they have to stay for up to 9 months in some streams to obtain permanent residency. So there's an employer-driven immigration policy that's happening here. Again, on the surface, I think most Canadians would say, of course, you should have a job before coming here, right? Like, we want you to come here and be successful. We don't want you coming here and then, not knowing where you're going to land and then you're on social assistance because of it, etc. No, there should be an employer aspect to this. And I think that's reasonable. But underneath that goal are models and patterns that heavily favor the employer that can lead to exploitative labor abuses, which is well documented in Canada based on what we've seen. I just want to pause here too. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but there's not enough data on the exploitative nature of some employers because we don't collect the data. So imagine, for example, the province said, okay, there's these employer streams, but part of the requirements are that Christopher comes to Ontario. Christopher is a high-skilled worker, so he'll work for KPMG or he'll work for I said KPMG because I used a report, but he'll work for a firm in Toronto, downtown Toronto. Part of this is that the employer has to now tell Ontario the hours Christopher works, that they keep track of those hours, that Christopher is living in, an apartment that is, on the market. It's not some shady 25-person basement apartment in downtown or in Brampton. Sorry, Brampton, I keep picking on you. But we're going to put more regulations on the employer so that we know for a fact that Christopher is coming. He's legitimately employed. He's gaining legitimate professional skills and project management skills. He works a wage that is competitive in his field. He has housing that is legit, not like some shady stuff going on, and that he's working the typical hours that a Canadian would be working, 40, 50 hours a week, depending on whatever. Anyways, all that to say, we need to make sure that this is legit employer and that you're not illegally doing anything that's shady that would give us cause for concern. See, that 360 view, I think, is important. And here's something else to think about. Given so much power to the employer can actually lead to other issues downstream that we just don't know about right now. Remember, I've talked about this before and it's a separate topic, but productivity and investment into employees in Canada lags behind the United States by a widening margin. So what pressures are the government putting on employers in Canada would be my question. It's not just Ontario with this, though. There's also Alberta, which I want to bring up because Alberta has been in the news a lot lately, separation aside. But there's something that they have here that I wanted to raise, and that is, again, streams for people who want to live in Alberta and become permanent residents. So similar to other provinces, there are ways to become a permanent resident in the province of Alberta, the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. Now, every province does get a number of nominees, immigrants that come to provinces, and the province says, hey, Christopher is a great worker. He should be nominated for permanent residency. He's completed 9 months at his employment. He's never caused any problems. He's making good money. He should have a pathway to permanent residency. Every province is given an allocation. I think Ontario's just went up to 14,000. And Alberta's, interestingly enough, if I can scroll down somewhere. Oh, it's on the next page. Let's see if hopefully you can see this. Their allocations are 6,403. And so 6,403, it's a very small number. But I want to point you to something here. This is from CICnews.com. Alberta introduces a fee to submit a worker expression of interest under the AAIP. So foreign nationals who wish to submit a worker expression of interest under Alberta's immigration program will have to pay a $135 fee. Previously, submitting this was free, and all other fees remain unchanged. Here's where it gets interesting. Now, there's different pathways, Candidates selected in a draw, and again, it's a draw, receive an invitation to apply for provincial nomination. Once invited, they submit a full application along with a $1,500 application fee and become applicants. The new $135 fee is separate from and in addition to the $1,500 application fee. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Again, Alberta has received an allocation of 6,400 nominations. There are currently over 44,000 work expressions of interest in the selection pool across all worker streams. 44,000. Now, let's do some math together so we can do this. Now, let me see if this works, because I'm so curious to hear what you have to say about this. But if I just change my screen to my calculator, here we go. And this is interesting. Let me bring my calculator down to show you. So we've got 44,000 people, and they're going to pay, let's actually do this again. They have to pay $135 plus that $1,500. So in total, it's $1,635 times 44,000. By the way, folks, these are non-refundable deposits. Now, I wish my Apple calculator would give commas. But you can see here it's $71,940,000 the provincial government is getting from potential permanent residents through fees alone. $71,940,000. Why do I bring this up? I mean, 71 million is nothing, right? In the grand scheme of things for governments, it's nothing. Why I bring this up is because it's indicative of other administrative bureaucracy charges that are being levied onto those that don't even know if they're going to become permanent residents. You might want to do this in the opposite way. If this is going to be a truly truthful system, by saying once you become permanent resident, those fees are either reimbursed or refunded or something. I bring all of this up because all of this shows me there's an employer-driven immigration system that our government is building, that they want to continue to build, that may very well have downstream impacts to our society. Notice the government isn't talking about housing pressures as a result of immigration. They're not talking about social cohesion. They're not talking about youth unemployment. They're focusing on how do we make the bureaucracy that remove the red tape, and how do we increase fees? Very interesting. So all of this to say, Our immigration system is not nearly as altruistic as we might think. It's employer-driven. There's rampant chance for exploitation and other shady forms of practices. And it's not just the federal government, it's the provincial governments that we should be very focused on. But more than that, we have to ask ourselves as Canadians, is this the type of immigration system that we want? Equity and fairness are things I think were once championed by the left, especially. I find when it comes to immigration, there's a lot of silence from our political masters on some of the mental models and patterns we're seeing. And that tells me that those lobbying efforts are quite strong, and perhaps the leaders themselves are cuckolded into believing this as well. That immigration, we should only focus on the temporary foreign worker program and not this other stuff that's happening behind the scenes. I'd love to know what you think about all of this. I know there's a lot that I've thrown at you, but I know you have very strong opinions about this, very informed opinions. I know you demand more of me sometimes than I demand of myself. So let me know in the comments below what you want to see in the next video, what you want me to see pull out of some of these policies, and where we can continue building this kind of thought process and social innovation together. Thanks, everyone. I'll definitely catch you in the next one.